All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Reframing Strategic Advantage with APIs. I'm Tyson Witten. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for API Management at CA Technologies. And we're super excited about today's webinar. I'm joined today by Mohan Subramaniam. And Mohan is really a very knowledgeable about the space that we're going to talk about today. Mohan's a professor at the Carroll School of Management at Boston College, and he's taught and written a lot, some within the Harvard Business Review, blogs, what have you, about the recent shifts that we're seeing in today's industries, and how software and how technology is really fueling these competitive shifts that we're seeing. So we're super excited to have Mohan today and join us and share some of his knowledge around these industry shifts and competitive shifts that we're seeing today. So Mohan's going to share some of the research that he's done, how APIs are becoming really fundamental to staying competitive in today's digital economy. So Mohan, thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you, Tyson.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. So as far as housekeeping items, what we're going to do today, I'll hit on the agenda briefly, but stay on the line after. We're going to have some Q&A at the end. Use the chat window to provide any questions. Mohan's going to stay on the line, provide some answers to some industry questions, API questions that you may have. And then as a follow-up, what we'll be doing is sending out an email with the presentation and some relevant content as well that might be useful for you. So as far as agenda, what we'll do is I'll hand it over to Mohan. He's going to kick it off. What he'll do is he'll start talking. He'll go through what we're seeing in terms of changes happening in the business landscape from industry to ecosystems, digital ecosystems, and then how APIs are really shaping that ecosystem strategy. Then what I'll do is I'll provide some examples. I'll go through some examples of how we're seeing this take place across different industries, auto, healthcare, as some examples, and then how to solve some of the challenges. Obviously, APIs, aren't perfect, day one. So you need to make sure that you're taking into account some of the challenges that come up, as you start to deploy APIs to support some of your digital initiatives. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mohan. Mohan, if you have anything else you want to add, just in terms of your background and some of your projects, please do, and then we'll get right into the presentation.
Oh, thank you, Tyson. Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be part of this, and a pleasure to discuss some of these issues. For me, as a strategy person, I've been in this field for the last 25 years, and this is truly a very exciting time because I'm noticing some fundamental shifts in terms of how companies can think not only in terms of their current competitive advantage, but more importantly about opportunities for growth. Right. So what I plan to do is I will spend some initial time in framing what this shift actually means from a strategic perspective, and then get into some of the details in terms of how APIs can shape current strategy from a current thinking about ecosystems. And then, of course, Tyson will complement that wonderfully with a lot of real-life examples and things about how to actually manage APIs and work with APIs in the trenches, so as to speak. Right. So for me, when I think about my own journey through the academic world of strategy, what comes to mind is an article that long time back when I started my MBA. This was one of the articles. This is an article that was written about 50 years back by Ted Levitt. It was a very influential HBR article, which essentially was titled "Marketing Myopia" and asked a very fundamental question, saying, "What business are you in?" Right? And so this question, what Ted Levitt essentially was asking was, he was pushing people to think more, from a broader perspective than what they were used to. So his famous examples were that if you asked a steam engine company what business you are in, they would say we are in the steam engine business, right? And he would ask you to think more broadly in terms of the transportation business. But that wisdom that he had brought some 50 years back, we in the last 20, 30 years have absorbed that to take what business you are in as what industry you are in, right? So it still makes sense. I'm not in the steam engine industry, but I'm in the transportation industry, and to that extent, we are still kind of following Ted Levitt's advice in terms of thinking more broadly. But the current shift that you're seeing today is forcing you to think much more broadly than that of an industry, and that's what I'll talk a little bit about. So if you think of Netflix, right, what Netflix was when it entered the business was, if you ask Netflix what business you are in, they would have said, or at least Blockbuster would have clearly said, we are in the video rental industry. And as we see now, it's so much broader than that. And so Blockbuster probably did not understand that shift, and Netflix probably did in a better sense. And what we are seeing today is the results of that, right? So what do we mean by this, right? What business you are in, and what do we mean by going broader than an industry? And then how do APIs fit in that? And that's what I'll talk about for the next few slides. And so here's what we think, right? What's your canvas for strategy? That is, and this is, the big contributions came in the 1980s. We all probably know about Michael Porter and, his wisdom about taking insights from what, the big field of industrial organization economics and bringing a lot of value in terms of strategic thinking. So from that perspective, it made a lot of sense to frame your boundaries of strategic thinking or strategy around an industry. And it made a lot of sense because competitive advantage could be analyzed or could be dealt much more analytically from if you looked at it from an industry perspective, and you could bring a lot of wisdom from years and decades of research of what industrial organizational economists were doing. This was a big shift. Before that, there were these frameworks. I don't know if you remember the Boston Consulting Group matrix, and there were these matrix where it was essentially we looked at strategy in terms of SWOT analysis, or what products, what markets, and what new products, what new markets. But the perspective of industry structure brought much more analytical rigor into that. And so if you think of the deep-rooted assumptions that we are carrying from the 1980s onwards, is that competitive advantage is rooted in industry structure, right? So we look at industry structure as either a kind of a monopoly structure where a few companies dominate, so Xerox, right, dominating the copier industry, or Canon dominating the copier industry. Even today, Airbus and Boeing dominating the commercial aircraft industry. It's because we see that industry structure as very attractive, where there are a few companies who can monopolize or dominate that structure, and that's where, and so the basic tenets of strategy becomes, how do you make the structure of the industry more attractive? But most importantly, in doing that, right, the driver of that competitive advantage, we always believed, came from inside the company. Your internal activities, your internal resources, your capabilities, your technology, or your brand. So Coca-Cola, Pepsi dominate the industry structure of soft drinks because of their internal brand, and so on and so forth. And a lot of that is true, right? But we are seeing some changes here. And third, again, very important, that growth from that perspective largely was either through diversification into different industries or acquisitions and mergers within the same industry. But we always advised companies to stay, the famous, right, stick to your knitting, which is, and there was a logic to it, which is that if your competitive advantage came from your internal resources, you want to grow within the framework of those industries that allowed you to really exercise those capabilities, or what we popularly call core competencies, right? So you didn't really go into random industries where you did not have a core competence. You stayed within industries where you had your capabilities were relevant, right? So essentially your limits to growth were constrained by how your competitive advantage was driven within a certain industry structure, or how much you could grow based on the versatility of your capabilities, your competencies, and so on and so forth. So that's what we always believed in, and this is what we have been thinking about. The strategic thinking that we had were rooted in these assumptions. Okay, so what's happening now? So the big change, right, and this is where the digitization part comes in, and I'll elaborate on these aspects a little more, is one thing is that the companies that the examples that we gave before of Xerox or Caterpillar or Coke or Pepsi, or where the internal resources were very dominant, they largely were around physical assets. And today, we are seeing through some very notable examples, and with the Internet of Things and stuff like that, those issues are creeping into what we call traditional businesses too, which is the importance of informational assets. And what happens with informational assets is that you are now able to absorb or leverage external strengths much more than what you used to do before. And because of that, external actors and what they can provide for your strategy becomes so much more important. And that requires you to shift your thinking, right, in terms of whether the boundaries of industry and monopolizing an industry structure, is that what is driving your strategy, or is it something else? Something else that depends on how well you can leverage external strengths. And for that, APIs become the key drivers. And so in many ways, the key to the next paradigms in strategy, the keys are with APIs, and they become very significant. So here are some reasons why informational assets, as opposed to physical assets, why they create a lot of significance, right? So the first thing, like I said, informational assets can be shared very differently from how physical assets were shared before. Uber and Airbnb are, the great examples that everybody gives. In fact, what probably you've heard, the valuation of Airbnb today is greater than the combined valuation of Wyndham Hotels and the Hyatt, right? So, and this is without owning any physical assets, that they have such huge valuation. And the reason behind that is that the market believes that the growth opportunities with informational assets are much greater than what was possible with physical assets. And so again, right, the strategic advantage is in how you leverage these informational assets, how you use these APIs, and that is the significance today in terms of how markets value you and what you are expected to do in terms of performance. We also see informational assets that they can be accumulated in ways different from physical assets. Physical assets you bought and you owned. Informational assets come from outside and they accumulate, and if you are clever about it, you can use it for a lot of applications. One of the most widely used ones is about consumer behavior. So we all know about Amazon and how well they understand consumers. Even Uber, right? So the information that they have, the more information they have about your location, about where you go, where you work, the better they are able to provide services for you. And that's how the competitive advantage grows. And so that's one thing. So digitization is transforming a lot in terms of where the advantage is. The second issue is with digitization is what we call complementers, right? The other companies that complement what you do. Now, in the olden days, and I'd like to give this example of the Star Alliance. So this started about 16 years, 17 years back with 5 airline companies essentially deciding to share mostly their physical assets, which was essentially saying that we'll share our baggage handling services, we'll share the routes that we have, we'll share our ticket booking systems. And so with that, what each of these airline companies could do was offer their customer a much wider set of services, which is that I book a ticket with Lufthansa. Lufthansa has a flight from Boston to Frankfurt, but some other airline has some services from Frankfurt to somewhere else. I don't need to book two separate tickets. I don't need to worry about my bags. So I get a seamless service because these airline companies have decided to share. And this became very popular. It grew to about 27 companies, 27 airline companies, and then again it has also spawned other rivals like there are other airline alliances that have come about imitating this model. But today, what digitization offers is that you can bring in thousands of other partners. There are car rental companies, there are vacation rental companies, there are hotels, there are restaurants. So what has changed is that rather than sharing the physical, say the seat or the assets of the capacity that you had, you are essentially sharing the information of the person who's occupying that seat. And that opens up lots of other possibilities for many other complementers to add to what you would have otherwise, could have offered as service. So we have an HBR article on this saying, why ally when you can API? And there are lots of examples that we give where APIs and the possibilities of bringing a lot of additional complementers it's essentially changing the nature in which you create value. So that's where APIs again become very important. So even if you go with the example of Netflix, so Netflix also had complementers in the old world of the video rental industry, right? But that complementer was, as you can see in that picture, was the post office. And this is what the old model of the physical assets was, that you had suppliers, but there were limits to what you could do with that. The other thing that is, and like we saw with the airline example, that you can explode the number of complementers that you can partner with to create value. But the other thing that is changing with digitization also is, and what you're seeing in this business landscape, is that the complementers themselves are going through a lot of turbulence. So in the old model with physical assets, an auto company would have, say, steel manufacturers as the complementers, and steel doesn't change so much. It's a pretty stable industry or a business. The post office has been around, for, 100 years probably. But what you see with Netflix is that the possibilities of complementers are very different in the coming years. And you see these 2 or 3 pictures, these are, examples of how the holograms could come. And they could completely change the way in which Netflix provides what it does, right? Entertainment, or entertainment information about entertainment. So APIs again allow you all that agility that you need, because it's not just that the number of complementers are exploding, but the complementers themselves are transforming very rapidly. So the old model of having a few finite set of relationships and maintaining stability on those kinds of relationships may not be very valid in the coming years, particularly in business environments where you see a lot of turbulence happening in terms of who you're complementing with. So based on that, what we are saying is that the canvas for strategy now is shifting from industries to ecosystems. And what do we mean by that, right? Ecosystems essentially mean where thousands of organizations can come together to provide value. And this has some very significant implications in terms of what your growth potential is. Remember, in the earlier days, we said what allowed you to grow was relatedness across industries. That was, and this was empirically borne out. In fact, there are few, more robust findings that we have found in empirical research and strategy than the wisdom saying that if you venture into unrelated industries, you are very likely to not do well. And it's okay when things are good and everything is booming and growing, you can get into whatever industry you want, but when the crunch comes, when you are in trouble, then it's very difficult for a company to make intelligent resource allocation decisions across industries in which they really don't have a clue, nor do they understand how their capabilities apply, right? So that we know. But if you're talking about ecosystems, then that constraint vanishes, because when external people are coming on and complementing what you have, the risk is not with you, the risk is somewhere else. In the old model, when you are diversifying or making mergers and acquisitions for growth, it's essentially you are putting the investments, or you are making those capital investment decisions and investments in physical assets, which are essentially bringing risk to you if things go wrong. Here, other companies can come and join your platform with a lot of innovative ideas that may or may not work, but the risk is not with you. And so you have the ability to experiment much, much more, right? So it calls for a different view and a vision for strategy and strategic thinking, calls for a different view and a vision for how you manage growth, right? So that's where our research is now going into. And so coming back to Ted Levitt's famous question, so what business are you in? And, from the 1980s, we answered that question saying, or we interpreted that question saying, what industry are you in? And today, the question becomes, what ecosystem are you in, right? So that's the big, significant shift in strategic thinking that we are witnessing. So how do we think about answering that question? What ecosystem are you in, right? And I'll walk through this framework that we have. It's very new. It's essentially in a draft form right now, just waiting to be published. So it's extremely new. And here's the thinking. So if you look at the two purple curves, that's what we call the growth frontier, right? So the earlier growth frontier was with the box on the left-hand lower column, which we call the value chain alliance ecosystem. It's essentially the old model or like the Star Alliance model, where you had an ecosystem, but it was essentially limited to your suppliers or your alliance partners and so on and so forth. And because of that, you had certain potential for growth, in fact, which were essentially driven because of high reliance on physical assets or your own internal resources. That's why, so the high reliance on physical assets is on the lower end of the spectrum, and on both sides of on X and Y axis, you see high reliance on informational assets, which is where we are noticing that your parameters for growth become very different, right? And so, again, talking about the box in the lower, the light blue colored box, which is the value chain alliance ecosystem, that we are not using informational assets all that much. I mean, we may be using it, but the predominant or the dominant driver of your competitive advantage is still physical assets. And if that is true, the way you grow is essentially through diversification or deeper market share in current industry structures by deepening your monopoly position, so on and so forth. But those growth potential is limited. And as we go into more informational assets rather than physical assets, you see that you can add a larger number of complementers, which you see in the light blue two arrows out here on both sides. So you can add much larger number of complementers. This is like the example we gave with the old star alliances versus today's airline business, where the ecosystems are flooded with a huge number of complementers. So, but how do you go about navigating that? I mean, do you just randomly get these complementers, or do you have a strategic plan in terms of how you want to grow? And a lot of it depends on, you know, the track that you take, and in many ways depends on the kind of informational assets that you are developing. So we describe this as three different options. One is what we call the service variety ecosystem, domain variety ecosystem, and the hybrid ecosystem. Okay, so in the service variety ecosystem, we are calling it. We are describing the airline example is very apt, where from the 27 airline companies that were partnering, it is today into thousands, but it's still focused on the service, the same service, the travel or the leisure. That's the domain. But within that domain, there are lots of complementers that are coming in, hotels, restaurants. But the complementers are kind of adding more service opportunities within the domain of travel and leisure. Right? On the other hand, if you think of a company like Uber, which based on its information on location and so on and so forth, location and, you know, the people who have signed up, they are now getting into other domains where, you know, they're now getting into delivery, for example. They can use the information on location, and, you know, they can deliver packages. They are now, you know, into delivering fresh food and so on and so forth. So there is a explosion of complementers that are taking them into different domains. And there's a hybrid, which, you know, where you can do both. And the best example here is of Watson. If you've noticed the recent ads of IBM's Watson, and for those of you, probably most of you are familiar with it, but Watson is this cognitive processing engine which can take a huge amount of information and data, unstructured data, and create very intelligent and useful patterns among them. So one of the examples of how, you know, Watson, so the earlier model, if you think about the physical assets model, the earlier model of IBM would have been that I have this cognitive processing engine, that's my core resource, I want to hold it tight, I want to control it, and I want to make sure that nobody imitates it, and I want to monopolize or make this industry structure, you know, very attractive because I have a dominant position. That would have been the old thinking. But with the new thinking with ecosystems, Watson has opened up its APIs to people who can come and complement that information, whatever informational assets they have, and add other services. So one example is of a publishing company called Elsevier. We know of Elsevier because a lot of our articles get published there. But Elsevier and Sloan Kettering, you know, the cancer specialist hospital, they got together, and Elsevier provided, you know, all their thousands and thousands of articles and published papers on oncology research. Sloan Kettering used the Watson platform to try to make sense out of it, and found out that, you know, you could provide a service to doctors where, as they are examining a patient, Watson, using all the information that Elsevier is providing in terms of their research, can give the doctor complementary information in terms of what the diagnosis should be, what the latest treatments are, what the side effects are, and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden now, IBM is into healthcare. Now, within healthcare, they can partner with other complementers who can give many more service, different service variety options. But they can also, and that's why it's a hybrid, that they've gotten into other spaces. So now if you've seen the recent ads of Watson, they're showing how Watson helps in crime, solving. If you've seen those ads where you have, a picture of a number plate of a car that is, not so some which is not fully visible, or you have some kind of a partial fingerprint, or you have some kind of partial, blood sample, and you have some kind of evidence that some eyewitnesses have given you, and Watson will put all of that together and will give you a solution which is much smarter, brighter, and useful than what you could have put together as detectives. So it's getting into crime, it's getting into recipe making, it's getting into all kinds of different domains, right? So that's where we call the hybrid ecosystem. So notice how our strategic thinking now has become different, because we view our canvas not as an industry with the notion of monopolizing that industry structure through our internal resources, but as a much broader ecosystem where we are inviting others to partner with us to create more value. And again, the key to that is APIs, how you use those APIs, how you attract complementers to those APIs, and so on and so forth. And so this is where, I would kind of, put as the concluding thoughts of this kind of framework before Tyson comes in and, gives more examples of how APIs can be actually managed and more tangibly done. But these are the broad questions when you're thinking about ecosystem strategy, right? So who are we attracting? What are our APIs attracting? Do we want to be in domain variety, service variety, or do we want to be a hybrid? Can we play? What game can we play? What game are we trying to play right now? Well, right? What new services are we offering in our existing domains? What new business domains are we entering? How are we expanding our services in each of our domains, right? So those questions become the drivers of growth more than what we had, the growth potential becomes, as we saw, becomes much greater because of that kind of thinking. And so more fundamentally, how much are we relying on informational as opposed to physical assets? So, a company like Caterpillar, yes, you have huge physical assets and, you've got a tremendous monopolistic advantage in that industry. But even Caterpillar is now adding, sensors to their machines, getting a lot of real-time information, which presently is adding, to their serviceability, to spare parts management, and so on and so forth. So every company, and that we are seeing with the Internet of Things, that has the potential now to use informational assets, and exponentially improve their growth opportunities and increase their growth opportunities and thinking. So with that perspective, I would like to, provide my thoughts here and ask Tyson to take over from here.
Fantastic, Mohan. We're going to have some questions on the end in a few minutes. So I just have a few slides that I wanted to hit on. Just given, dig a little bit deeper into the API itself. Now, one of the things, Mohan obviously is going through the value of data and digitization, but where the value really comes through as well, as valuable as the data itself, or maybe even more to a certain extent, right? In terms of how customers, consumers are kind of recognizing that value is through the app, right? Because that's how they're engaging, with the business at the end of the day. And so, when you think about how our APIs are used, they're really that connective tissue, right? They're connecting information from your enterprise to the app, and it can be in multiple forms, right? I mean, the examples in terms of Netflix and Uber, right, and some of the other examples in travel and what have you. I mean, what is that engagement? The engagement is the application, it's the app, and it comes in multiple forms. It can be mobile devices, right? It could be the Internet of Things. Mohan was bringing up, when you think about entertainment in terms of how you're communicating through different types of devices, right? In terms of set-top boxes, I mean, it could be video game consoles, right? But that common denominator outside of the data itself is the app, or the application. And the API provides that connectivity, between the data and the application. And so, just to drive that home a little bit more in terms of, what does that mean in terms of where APIs fit in terms of data in the app? Well, the first is around speed, right? And a lot of what we hear from from our customers in terms of how they're enabling their apps and mobile apps is around getting those applications and those mobile apps out to the market much faster. So how do APIs help there? Well, APIs essentially, they're reusable interfaces. So if I'm a developer and I need to access information, I would then typically have to develop back to that database, right, or to that service. What an API does, it provides a catalog of all those services, so they can just pick and choose, right? So if they, for instance, in this slide, this is an automobile slide, so the app there is an app you would use, say, for instance, to engage with your vehicle, right, to unlock your car, to lock your car. So if I'm developing an app to perform those functions, I want to be able to connect to that information pretty quickly, right? So I want to go to a catalog and then select an API, right? That API that allows me to start my vehicle, right? Turn the lights on, turn the lights off, and what have you. But I want to do it pretty quickly, and that's what APIs do. They provide that reusable interface. I can just keep going back for every additional app that I want to create and just select that existing API or reusable interface. So it's all about speed, really. But more so than speed is also experience, right? I mean, it's providing those reusable interfaces, but to collect information, internally. So it could be I want to start the car, I want to turn on my lights in my vehicle, but it could be from other organizations, right? Maybe even organizations outside of your particular business, right? It could be recall information. Maybe you don't manage that part of your business internally, right? So you want to be able to access that information just as easily as if you would access it internally. So an API provides that access, right? That you can quickly select and then embed as part of that app. So it provides a better experience, right, overall in terms of the information that's provided from different sources within that one app or application. But it's also providing the ability to provide a consistent experience, right, or personalized experience across channels. So maybe it's not just the app that I'm engaging the business over. It could be directly with some type of customer service rep, right? And the information I'm seeing and engaging with over the app, I want that to be the same, right? I want them to understand me the same way as if I'm talking to somebody on the phone. So the APIs kind of unlock those data silos so you can share information across those different channels. And then this last one's about money, right? It's about opening up this information. It's about monetizing it. It's also about engaging inside those those new digital ecosystems, right? And capturing new market share across those new digital ecosystems, like Mohan was just going through. And so when you think about that third step here, that a lot of rich information is collected over time. So it's not just about providing that information out to your customer directly. Now it's about what can I do with that information I've collected from my customer in terms of those adjacent markets, right, or those complementers, for instance. And so if you think about the automobile industry, well, what's another business that works very closely with the automobile industry? Insurance, of course. And so that's a lot of rich information that insurance companies would love to have so that they could provide different pricing models to those same customers. And so that's what's happening. The automobile industry, they're opening up this information out to insurance companies. So if you've heard about UBI, right, or usage-based insurance, it's providing a different type of pricing model based on the behavior of that driver. And then the automobile industry is able to monetize that. They're able to capture additional value of information they weren't able to monetize in the past, and they're able to do that through these adjacent markets. So as I go through a couple more examples here, this is the same one in terms of what I just went through from an automobile standpoint. The main point of this slide is just to show that it really is a maturity that's happening in the marketplace and from a digital standpoint. And so if you kind of think back in terms of how this evolved over time, specifically with the automobile industry, I mean, the way you were engaging with dealerships was in person, right? I mean, you're going to the dealer and you were researching and you were getting information directly from that individual at the dealership. But the web and mobile, really has transformed that industry in which it's provided information a lot faster, so you can research faster, gain more information about the vehicle that you're thinking about purchasing before you even show up at the dealership. And so that's, accelerating, right, purchasing. It's providing richer information, a better experience. But as you kind of can see that digital maturity continues to evolve, right? And you kind of hear about these concepts and even more than concepts. I mean, they're being practiced today, omni-channel types of business models in which, it's not just about engaging over one channel, the web, but it's engaging over mobile, it's engaging over IoT, right? So I want to be able to provide a great experience so I can improve loyalty over time. So when it's time to purchase a vehicle again, that consumer comes back to me and buys that car. So my experience to date has really only been through the dealership when I bring the vehicle in to get it maintained. Not always a great experience. So through a connected car, I want to be able to provide a great experience all the time for that driver, for that consumer. One way to do that is through the app. I want to be able to give them the ability to unlock the car, lock the car, get diagnostic information. And then obviously over time, that next step in that maturity model is what can I do with that information? How can I monetize it? So there's a lot of examples like this. I mean, healthcare, for instance, is another one, especially in the United States in terms of 40 million now in the population. It's changing behaviors, right? It's changing how payers and providers are engaging with patients, right? And so, for instance, as a payer, I have 40 million that I need to get into my system that I want to purchase my plan. How am I going to do that? How do I make it easy for them, right? And that's about connecting them to this rich information, to my service, to my plans through the app, right? So the app becomes that that point of engagement for the patient so that they can quickly research and then select the plan. Also from a provider standpoint, think about primary care physicians, right, and the capacity issues and resource issues that they're going to have. So the model of delivery is going to change, right? It's not always going to be in-office types of engagements. And so you think about an omni-channel type of experience. That could be through the mobile app. You could be engaging with your primary care physician through a mobile device, right? And it would be in a remote or telehealth type of experience, and that's happening today, and that's a big growth area within the health industry. But again, as you kind of move through this digital maturity model, it's very similar. A lot of rich information is being collected from patients, and and so what can I do with that? Especially with IoT, you think about medical devices and how you're able to monitor health, or you're able to improve compliance with specific diseases, such as diabetes, and being able to monitor, glucose monitoring systems and what have you. That's a lot of rich information that's being collected, and you can leverage that, right? You can share that with different analytics companies, right, to improve overall healthcare, right, or to reduce cost. And so, there's some consistencies that we're seeing across, right, these digital changes and shifts that are happening in the marketplace in terms of speed the market, experience, and then what these organizations are doing with data and how they're sharing them, monetizing them, and getting into new opportunities in adjacent markets and digital ecosystems. The same here. If you look at finance as well, I'll go right to the new markets here. And so Mohan was bringing up Uber, for instance, right? And so think about credit card companies, right? Think about the loyalty points that they have in their books, right? That's hitting their bottom line at the end of the day, right? And so those points are sitting there. They need to find a better way that they can, find a better way that they can provide them to their customers, their consumers, so they can get better value out of them, right? And so what have they done? Well, they've opened up those loyalty points to other businesses, right, such as Uber. So not only, no longer do you have to just use your credit card, right, and make a payment, a financial payment, but now you can offer loyalty points as a form of payment, right? And so you see banks and credit cards, they're opening up this information, right, so that they can reach new markets, right, markets maybe they weren't reaching before with different services, right, to provide better value to their end customers and to reach new markets that they weren't reaching in the past. So these are some pretty good examples to go through. Mohan hit on travel and hospitality as well. A customer of ours, Alaska Airlines, perfect example in terms of opening up information right, through APIs. Well, first, collecting information through APIs, internal and external, to deliver a better experience directly through their apps to their customers, but then also opening up information such as scheduling, right, and seat assignments and what have you, so that they can reach a new market, right? So for travel aggregators and what have you, so that they can extend, right, their brand and extend their services, right, so that they can capture more market as well. So a ton of examples across different industries and what Mohan was going through. So just really quickly, the one thing I wanted to hit on as well is that APIs, they're fundamental to each of those in terms of speeding up app development, providing that experience, and then opening up that information. But a lot of challenges as well, right? And so, there's slow app development, there's data risks that happen. Omni-channel is not the easiest thing to accomplish in terms of sharing information. And then, how are you really monetizing those transactions and the usage of APIs? And so, what you should be looking for in order to solve those challenges is the right API management solution. And the way that we kind of organize capabilities that deliver value to support this shift in the market that you're seeing and the digital transformation events that are happening in the marketplace really fall across 4 different areas: integration, security, the ability to accelerate development, and then the ability to unlock data. And so the way that, in this slide, it kind of organizes that in a little bit more detail. But these are the things that you should be thinking about, right? Especially as you're starting to kind of roll out new app projects, or you need to open up information to new partners in digital ecosystems. And the first is around integration. You have existing data, you have existing systems, you have legacy architectures, you have enterprise service bus, you have, to get a little technical, right, SOA architectures. You need to leverage that, right, that investment. So you need to connect that old with the new, more modern types of environments like mobile apps. And so integration is significantly important in this new digital economy. The next is security. You can't open up that information without making sure that it's secure, especially in the highly regulated industries that are sharing sensitive information, private information. And so the ability to secure the API is significantly important from different threats such as cross-site scripting attacks and SQL injections, significantly important. But access is also just as much as important, and you need to make sure that you're controlling access from the app, so as somebody's accessing the app, all the way to the back-end API. So that's also very important. And you got to make sure it's convenient, right? You can't lose that convenience. You can't sacrifice convenience for security. So again, significantly important that you're deploying a solution that takes that in mind, right? The right balance between convenience and security. So, I mean, that kind of gets you to a stage in which you have APIs created, they're secure, but the other side of that coin, you need to make it simple for developers to access those APIs, right? So how are you bringing developers on to access those APIs that you've just stood up? And so you need to be able to provide them, the right tools to discover APIs, right? To learn about APIs through documentation, to collaborate with other developer communities as well, to test APIs. They're all very important in terms of enabling and simplifying that app development process. And then provide them the right tools as well, right? SDKs in which they can simply embed within the app and really just accelerate that time to market in terms of app development. And then the last one, maybe even closer to a lot of what Mohan has been talking about today, is unlocking the value of data. And the way we look at this is really 2 different ways. One is a direct business model, and the other is more indirect. The direct is really the monetization of APIs, right? So if I have a partner that wants to access my information, right, the digital value, my digital assets, there are different, certain businesses that would then want to charge for that usage. They want to be able to charge per API transaction. So you need to make sure that you have a solution that can account for that, that can set up plans, pricing, tying to billing systems, so that you can charge and then bill for the usage of your APIs. But not every transaction is going to be charged for, right? And a lot of what we're seeing in the market, and this is a lot of what Mohan was going through, is really the ability to build out your digital ecosystem. So really an indirect model, if you will, right? So it's a way that you can provide your services to improve the overall value of the service that your partner is delivering to the market, right? So it's a way for you to open up that information, possibly to markets that you've never even been in the past, for multiple reasons that Mohan just went through. But even in that model, you still need a way to measure performance, right? You need to be able to measure how are my partners, right, these complementers, right, these new adjacent markets that I'm getting into, how are they recognizing value? So you need to be able to measure through analytics, right, the performance of APIs and the APIs and how they connect to the apps that your partners are now delivering out to their marketplace. And so analytics, reporting, significantly important as part of this solution. So that's what I'm going to leave you with as far as API management is concerned, in terms of the 4 areas that you have to be thinking about to support these digital projects and API projects that you have. Some real value that we've seen from customers in terms of these areas. We've seen some significant improvements with their projects. In terms of integration, right? We're able to, some customers were able to improve data transformation 94% more quickly. From a security standpoint, significant, right? Significantly important. A lot of our customers find security extremely valuable in the way that we deliver it. 91% found security to be differentiated. And then from a development standpoint, I was bringing up, how we're getting APIs out to market faster, how we're providing SDKs, right, to accelerate mobile app development. So you see that right there. One of our customers was able to go from 90 days to 3 days in terms of time to market. And that's a huge improvement. And then overall, ROI is important. You want to make sure that, especially when you start opening up through new channels, and so we've seen a return on investment estimated by about 70% via new revenue streams. So a lot of value there in terms of how an API management solution can help your digital initiatives. So before I get into questions, quickly, if you are looking at API management solutions, one of the first steps I would recommend is take a look at the analyst community, right? Get engaged with Forrester, get engaged with Gartner, right? And kind of take a look at the vendors, and you can see that CA Technologies is a leader in the space in both Forrester as well as Gartner. Okay, great. So why don't we move on? We have a few minutes. Why don't we move over to the question part of the webinar? Now, Mohan, I have just a few questions for you personally. Just given the fact that when I was a student, I was sitting in the seats in business school. APIs really didn't come up, right? Like 15, 20 years ago. How are you applying this, right, to the syllabus and to your curriculum? I mean, is this part of the conversations that you're having with business students today?
Right, I do at least. I mean, because most of my work is now involved around this. So I would say 30% of my syllabus is essentially around ecosystem strategy, of which APIs become a pretty significant part. So I do bring this up in my syllabus pretty significantly. And also some interesting, I give some, I bring some startups who are, bringing some new ideas into the market and throw it before students to ask them to try to see it, from the old industry structure model and from an ecosystem model, and what kind of implications they would have about strategy and growth. So it's actually very fascinating to see all that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic, especially, and we love that, especially being in the API and API management space, right? Educating those business students early. I mean, it's fantastic. Some of the other things, I know I'm going to hit on some of the articles that, that you wrote as well. I think we might have, in one of the abstracts that we sent out, I think we hit on them. Can you share just a little insight? I mean, I think there were 2 or 3 that you just put out. This is your opportunity. And why don't you share with the audience a few of those topics and maybe give them, right, some guidance on where they can access them, because I thought they were great pieces. Maybe even talk a second about what's coming up as well. I know you have some other projects that are coming up.
Right. So, so by the way, the specific the three articles there, the links of that are in the presentation. So if anybody is interested, they can go into those links, and I'd be happy to share them with you so that you can share them with them too. So that's they can really go into the details of that. But the other interesting implications are for global strategy. If you really look at it, if you think about, say, even China. Right. You think about the internet platform business there, where a lot of it is around ecosystems and bringing external inputs into your business model. Today they have the local companies there. Of course, Alibaba is the most famous, but there are so many others like, Tencent and Baidu and Sina and Wankel. They have cumulatively over 95% share. A lot of the U.S. companies have withdrawn from that market. If you look at India, again, there's a company called Flipkart, which is way ahead of Amazon. So the interesting thing here is, how do, and we assume, that, of course, Coca-Cola and Caterpillar and all these companies who have been operating through their own internal resources, and in many ways their core competencies have been able to go into those markets and adapt out there. But it's one thing to adapt your internal strengths and translate it into a foreign market like a brand or a technology, but it's a completely different ball game to attract external inputs onto your platform and what kind of understanding it requires of those cultures and institutions and so on and so forth. So that's a domain which nobody else has talked much about, but the global implications of extending advantage based on APIs outside is something that is very interesting, which people are slowly coming to terms with, because they're looking at the empirical evidence right now, and that's not very good, and we have not yet figured that out. Right? We know how to adapt our brand externally outside, but we don't know how to adapt our strengths at creating ecosystems, right, abroad. So that's something that I'm working on, by the way.
That's fantastic. Yeah, make sure you keep us updated on that. So I think we're going to bring this to a wrap. So Mohan, thank you very much for attending today's webinar.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully everybody's found some value in here. Hey, maybe we can do this again, right, in a few months as well. I think it was kind of some new information and research that you're working on. I think it would be a great topic. So, yep, just bring it up to a wrap again, just as a housekeeping item. So we'll follow up with everybody with the presentation and some relevant assets as well. So thank you everybody for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you.